The manila envelope trembled in Martha Kinsley's hands as she stared at the typed document inside. Her arthritic fingers clutched the paper's edge. A bill for $2,000 labeled, monthly accommodation fee. Not rent their own son couldn't even call it that. Martha's chest tightened as she read the name at the bottom. Thomas Kinsley, her only child, the boy she'd raised in this very house for 27 years. Mom, did you get the paperwork I left for you? Thomas's voice boomed from the kitchen where he was making himself coffee in the travel mug she'd given him last Christmas. He hadn't bothered to make her a cup. Martha swallowed hard, tucking a strand of silver hair behind her ear. 68 years old, and here she was, being charged to live in the home she and her late husband Robert had purchased 40 years ago. The home where they'd raised Thomas. The home she'd signed over to him 3 months ago, when her arthritis had worsened, and he'd suggested it would simplify things. I see it, she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. $2,000 a month to stay in my own home? Thomas walked into the living room, expensive suit perfectly pressed, not a single dark hair out of place. He looked just like his father, but Robert would never have done this. Never. It's not technically your home anymore, Mom. His tone was the same one he used when speaking to his 6-year-old daughter about things she couldn't possibly understand. We talked about this. I'm handling all the maintenance and property taxes now. $2,000 is actually below market value for this neighborhood. Martha set the paper down on the coffee table, the one she'd refinished herself 15 years ago. When you suggested putting the house in your name, you said it was to help me manage things as I got older. You never mentioned I'd be paying you to live here. Thomas sighed, checking his watch. Listen, I've got a meeting. We can discuss this tonight. It's just the reality of the situation, Mom. I have expenses, a family to support. This arrangement helps us both. Before she could respond, he was out the door, leaving behind the scent of expensive cologne and the echo of his casual cruelty. Martha sat alone in the suddenly too quiet house, memories flooding back. Robert and she buying this place, when they were barely more than kids themselves, scraping together the down payment. Painting every room themselves. Bringing baby Thomas home, his nursery carefully decorated with hand-painted clouds. Thomas's height marks on the kitchen door frame. Robert's last day before the cancer took him, sitting in the garden he'd built, telling her, "Take care of our boy, and take care of our home." She hadn't cried then. She wouldn't cry now. Instead, Martha stood up slowly, wincing at the familiar pain in her knees, and walked to the bedroom that had once been Thomas's. Now it served as her craft room, where she spent hours creating the quilts she donated to the children's hospital. She settled into her chair and picked up her needle, her mind already formulating a plan. The next morning, Martha woke at 6, just as she had for the past 40 years. She made herself a cup of tea and walked carefully out to the garden. Robert's rose bushes were in full bloom, their fragrance filling the air. She clipped 3 perfect blooms and brought them inside, arranging them in a small crystal vase on the kitchen table. By the time Thomas's sleek car pulled into the driveway that evening, Martha had prepared her response. She'd called Pastor Jim at First Community Church, spoken with her friend Alice, who was on the church board, and visited her bank. Now she sat at the kitchen table, a check written out for exactly $2,000. "Something smells good," Thomas said as he walked in, setting his briefcase on the counter she'd polished that afternoon. "I made your favorite pot roast with those little potatoes you like." Martha smiled, gesturing to the table she'd set with the good china. "I thought we should have a nice dinner before we talk." Thomas loosened his tie, eyeing her suspiciously. "So you're not upset about the accommodation fee?" "Let's eat first," she said, serving him a generous portion. She'd always shown love through food, and despite everything, he was still her son. They ate mostly in silence, Thomas checking his phone every few minutes. Martha asked about her granddaughter, Lily, and he answered with brief updates about her kindergarten achievements and upcoming dance recital. Bring her by sometime, Martha suggested. I miss her. She's very busy with activities, Thomas replied. Maybe next month. When they'd finished eating, Martha cleared the plates and returned with 2 slices of apple pie, his favorite since childhood. She set them down and took her seat, folding her hands on the table. I've given a lot of thought to your accommodation fee, she began. Thomas nodded, forking a bite of pie. Good, it's really the most practical solution. I agree that $2,000 is fair, Martha said, which is why I've written you this check. She slid the folded paper across the table. He opened it and nodded with satisfaction. I'm glad you're being reasonable about this, Mom. There's something else, Martha continued, her voice calm. I've made some decisions about my future here. Thomas's phone buzzed, and he glanced at it before returning his attention to her. What do you mean? I spoke with Pastor Jim today. The church has a senior living ministry program. They help connect elderly church members with affordable housing options. Alice Pemberton, you remember her. She taught your Sunday school class. She's on the board now. They have a lovely little apartment becoming available next month in their senior complex. I've put down a deposit. Thomas set down his fork with a clatter. What are you talking about? You don't need to move. The rent there is only $800 a month, utilities included, much more reasonable than $2,000. And they have a shuttle service for doctor's appointments and grocery shopping, so I won't need to ask you for rides anymore. Mom, that's ridiculous. Those places are depressing. You don't want to live there. Martha took a sip of her tea. I also spoke with the church about their quilting ministry. They have a wonderful room with tables at the right height for someone with arthritis. I'll be donating my time there 3 days a week, teaching quilting to younger women in the congregation. Thomas was staring at her now, pie forgotten. You can't be serious. This is your home. Not anymore, Martha said softly, echoing his words from yesterday. It's not technically my home, remember, it's yours. And while I appreciate your generous offer to let me rent it, I think it makes more sense for me to find a place better suited to my needs. This is about the fee, isn't it? You're punishing me. Thomas's face flushed with anger, so reminiscent of his childhood tantrums that Martha almost smiled. No, Thomas. This is about me making the best decision for my future. I'll be giving you a month's notice, as stated in the paperwork you left me. I should be fully moved out by July 1st. Thomas pushed back from the table, his chair scraping loudly on the floor. This is absurd. Where am I supposed to find a tenant for this place by next month? Martha gathered the dessert plates. I'm sure you'll figure it out. A smart businessman like you. Now, would you like coffee with your pie? The week that followed was tense. Thomas called multiple times, alternating between trying to convince Martha she was being foolish and accusing her of manipulating him. Her daughter-in-law Caroline called once, her carefully measured words making it clear she'd been sent as an emissary. Thomas is just worried about you, Martha. Living alone at your age can be dangerous. That's why he wanted you to stay in the house where he could keep an eye on you. For $2,000 a month, Martha reminded her gently. A pause. Well, maintaining a house is expensive, and with Lily's private school tuition. How is my granddaughter? I haven't seen her in nearly 2 months. Another pause. She's fine, very busy. Listen, Martha. Thomas thinks you're not being rational about this. Maybe we should have a family meeting with your doctor. Sometimes at your age. I'm not having cognitive issues, Caroline. Martha interrupted, surprising herself with her firmness. I'm making a practical financial decision, just like Thomas taught me to do. On Sunday, Martha attended church as she had every week for the past 38 years. She wore her blue dress, the one Robert had always loved, and her sensible low heels. When the service ended, she made her way through the crowded fellowship hall to where Pastor Jim stood chatting with parishioners. "Martha, just the woman I wanted to see," he greeted her warmly. At 65, Pastor Jim was no young man himself, his beard more salt than pepper these days. "Alice was just telling me about your generous offer." Alice Pemberton, 72 and elegant in a lavender suit, beamed at Martha. "It's going to make such a difference to our outreach programs." Martha smiled back, aware of curious glances from nearby church members. "It feels like the right thing to do. Robert would have wanted it." "The church council is meeting tomorrow evening," Pastor Jim said. "We'd love to have you there to discuss the details, and perhaps you could join us for the seniors' lunch beforehand. It would be a good chance to meet some of your future neighbors." "I'd like that very much," Martha replied. When she returned home, she was surprised to find Thomas's car in the driveway. He rarely visited on Sundays, claiming he needed the day to prepare for the work week. She found him in the kitchen, sitting at the table with a stack of papers in front of him. "Mom," he began without preamble, "I've been thinking about our arrangement, and I realize I may have been a bit hasty." Martha hung her purse on the hook by the door, the same hook that had held her purse for 40 years. "Oh? I've drawn up a new agreement." He pushed the papers toward her. "No monthly fee, you can stay here rent-free." Martha sat down across from him, not touching the papers. "What changed your mind?" Thomas cleared his throat. "Caroline pointed out that family should help family, and, well, I may have been too focused on the financial aspects without considering the emotional ones." "I see." Martha folded her hands in her lap. "And does this new arrangement still have the house in your name?" "Well, yes, that just makes sense from an estate planning perspective. But you'd have lifetime rights to live here, no rent." Martha nodded slowly. "That's a generous offer, Thomas, but I've already put down my deposit at Orchard Grove. The apartment is quite nice, smaller than this house, but perfect for one person. And I'll be closer to the church." Thomas's jaw tightened. "Mom, be reasonable. Why would you want to live in some tiny apartment when you could stay in your home?" "Our home," she corrected gently. "The home your father and I built together. The home we raised you in. But things change. Robert is gone. You're grown with your own family. And I'm making choices that work for me now. What about Lily? Don't you want her to be able to visit her grandmother in the same house her father grew up in?" It was a low blow, and they both knew it. Martha felt a stab of pain at the mention of her granddaughter, whom she saw so rarely despite living less than 2 miles away. "Lily is welcome to visit me at Orchard Grove any time. They have a lovely garden and a community room where we could bake cookies together just like we used to." Thomas ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "This is crazy. You're giving up a 4-bedroom house to live in what, a 1-bedroom apartment?" "Because I asked for a reasonable contribution to household expenses." Martha reached out and patted his hand. "I'm 68 years old, Thomas. I don't need 4 bedrooms anymore. What I need is security, community, and purpose. I'll have all of those at Orchard Grove." "And you can't have those things here, in your own home?" "Not for $2,000 a month, no." Thomas stood up abruptly. "Fine. I can see you've made up your mind. I hope you don't regret this decision." After he left, Martha sat at the kitchen table for a long time, looking out at the garden Robert had planted. There was a heaviness in her chest, but also a curious lightness. For the first time in years, she was making a decision solely for herself, not to accommodate others or to avoid rocking the boat. The next day, she began sorting through her belongings, deciding what to take to her new, smaller home. Each item held memories: the crystal vase that had been a wedding gift, the quilt her mother had made, Thomas's kindergarten art projects she'd carefully preserved. She worked methodically, filling boxes labeled Keep, Donate, and for Thomas. When her phone rang that afternoon, she was surprised to see Caroline's name on the caller ID. Martha, it's Caroline. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. Not at all, dear. I'm just doing some sorting. Thomas told me about your decision. Caroline's voice was strained. I thought perhaps we could have lunch tomorrow. Just the two of us? Martha paused in her labeling of a box of photo albums. That would be lovely. Shall I meet you somewhere? I could pick you up around 11:30. There's a nice little cafe near my yoga studio. Perfect. I'll be ready. The cafe Caroline chose was trendy and expensive, with avocado toast and $20 salads on the menu. Martha ordered a cup of soup and half a sandwich, mindful of her new budget. Caroline, looking polished in designer jeans and a silk blouse, leaned forward after their orders were taken. Martha, I want to speak frankly with you. This situation with Thomas has gotten out of hand, and I feel partially responsible. Martha raised an eyebrow. How so? When Thomas first mentioned putting the house in his name, I should have asked more questions. I assumed it was just about helping you with the paperwork and maintenance as you got older. That's what I assumed too, Martha said dryly. Caroline had the grace to look embarrassed. When he mentioned charging you rent, I told him it seemed excessive. But he pointed out how much the house would rent for on the open market, and how we're paying for Lily's private school and our mortgage, and, well, she trailed off. You decided it was reasonable, Martha finished for her. I didn't realize how it would make you feel. Caroline fiddled with her water glass. Thomas can be very pragmatic about financial matters. Yes, he can. Their food arrived, and they ate in silence for a few minutes. Martha waited, sensing there was more to this lunch invitation than an apology. Finally, Caroline set down her fork. The thing is, Martha, Thomas is very upset about you moving out, more than he's letting on. He sees it as a rejection. Martha sighed. I'm not rejecting him, Caroline. I'm making a practical decision based on my circumstances. I know that, but Thomas, he's always been sensitive about feeling abandoned ever since his father died. Martha felt a flicker of irritation. I didn't abandon Thomas when Robert died. I was right there, raising him on my own, working 2 jobs to make sure he had everything he needed. Of course you were. Caroline backpedaled. I just meant emotionally. He talks sometimes about how you withdrew after Robert's death, how you were physically present but emotionally distant. The soup suddenly tasted like sawdust in Martha's mouth. Had she withdrawn? Those years after Robert's death were a blur of grief and exhaustion, working at the insurance office all day and then at the department store evenings and weekends. She'd done everything she could to maintain Thomas's routine, to make sure he didn't feel the financial impact of becoming a single-income household. I did the best I could, she said finally. Caroline reached across the table and squeezed her hand. I know you did, and so does Thomas, deep down. That's why this whole thing with the house is hitting him so hard. In his mind, he's losing his childhood home and his connection to his father. The house is still in the family, it's his now. But without you in it, Caroline let the sentence hang. Martha set down her spoon. What exactly are you asking me to do, Caroline? Just reconsider? Maybe delay the move? Give Thomas some time to process everything and figure out a better arrangement? I've signed a lease. Put down a deposit. I'm sure they would understand if you changed your mind. Martha took a deep breath. And what about the $2,000 a month? Is Thomas reconsidering that? Caroline hesitated. He mentioned a reduced rate, maybe $1,000? Martha almost laughed. $1,000 to stay in the home I've already paid for once. How generous. Martha, please. For Lily's sake, if nothing else. She adores her grandma's house. It was another low blow, using her granddaughter as leverage. But unlike Thomas, Caroline seemed genuinely distressed. Martha softened her tone. Bring Lily to visit me at Orchard Grove. There's a playground there, and a duck pond. She'll love it. Caroline's expression made it clear this wasn't the answer she'd hoped for. They finished their lunch with stilted conversation about Lily's dance class and Caroline's volunteer work at the art museum. When they parted, Caroline hugged her tightly. Please think about what I said. Families should stay together. Martha returned home to find a message from Alice Pemberton on her answering machine. Martha, dear, the church council is thrilled with your proposal. We've scheduled a special meeting for Friday at 2 o'clock to finalize everything. Pastor Jim will call you with the details. Martha smiled as she hung up the phone. At least someone was happy about her decision. The next day, she visited Orchard Grove to see her new apartment again and take measurements for her furniture. The complex was modern and well-maintained, with wide hallways to accommodate walkers and wheelchairs if needed. Her one-bedroom unit had large windows overlooking a courtyard garden, a small kitchen with new appliances, and a walk-in shower with grab barsa feature her current bathroom lacked. Mrs. Abernathy, the manager, greeted her warmly. We're so excited to have you joining us, Mrs. Kinsley, and I understand you'll be teaching quilting classes for our residents. Yes, and for the church youth group too. I thought it might be nice to bring the generations together. Wonderful! Intergenerational activities are so valuable. By the way, several residents saw you during Sunday's lunch and asked me to introduce them when you move in. I think you'll find we have a very welcoming community here. As Martha walked through what would soon be her new home, she felt a weight lifting. Yes, the apartment was smaller than her house. Yes, she would miss Robert's garden. But here she would have purpose, connection, and most importantly, dignity. When she returned home, she found Thomas sitting on her front porch, looking uncharacteristically disheveled. His tie was loosened, and his eyes were red-rimmed. Thomas, is everything all right? Is Lily okay? He looked up at her, and for a moment, she saw the little boy who had skinned his knee and run to her for comfort. Mom, we need to talk. Martha sat beside him on the porch swing. What's wrong? I got a call from Pastor Jim today. Thomas's voice was hoarse. He wanted to thank me for my generosity in donating my parents' house to the church. Martha took a deep breath. So the news was out. I was going to tell you after the church council meeting on Friday. Tell me what, exactly? That you're giving away my house? Not your house, Thomas, my house. He stared at her in confusion. But we transferred the deed to me. 3 months ago. I have the paperwork. Martha nodded. Yes, we signed papers 3 months ago, but they weren't a deed transfer. They were a power of attorney and a living will. The deed to this house is still in my name. It always has been. Thomas's face drained of color. That's not possible. The lawyer said, Your lawyer, Thomas, not mine. Martha kept her voice gentle. I signed the papers you asked me to, giving you medical power of attorney and financial power of attorney should I become incapacitated, but I never signed over the deed to this house. Then why did you agree to pay me rent? Thomas demanded, anger replacing shock. I wanted to see what you would do, Martha said simply. I wanted to understand what kind of man my son had become. Thomas flinched as if she'd slapped him. So this was all some kind of test? And I failed? It wasn't a test, Thomas. It was a revelation. For both of us. They sat in silence for a long moment, the porch swing creaking gently beneath them. A mourning dove cooed from the maple tree Robert had planted when Thomas was born. So you're really giving the house to the church? Thomas finally asked, his voice small. Yes, they'll use it as transitional housing for families in need. Single mothers, just like I was after your father died. Families who need a safe place to land while they get back on their feet. Martha looked out at the front yard, remembering Thomas learning to ride his bike on the sidewalk, Robert chasing behind him. This house was a blessing to us. Now it will be a blessing to others. But what about Lily? What about her inheritance? Martha turned to face her son. Lily will inherit the values her grandfather and I tried to instill in this family: generosity, compassion, the understanding that how we treat others matters more than what we own. Thomas stood up abruptly. I need to talk to my lawyer. This can't be legal. It's perfectly legal, Thomas. The house is mine to do with as I choose, and I've chosen. He stalked to his car without another word. Martha watched him drive away, her heart heavy. This wasn't how she'd wanted things to play out. She'd hoped that when faced with the truth, Thomas might reflect, might recognize what he'd done and why it hurt her so deeply. But perhaps that was expecting too much. The next day, Pastor Jim and Alice came to visit. They sat at Martha's kitchen table, reviewing the donation paperwork. The lawyers have looked everything over, Pastor Jim assured her. Once the council approves on Friday, we can proceed with the transfer. And you're certain about this, Martha? Alice asked. It's such an enormous gift. Martha nodded. I'm certain. Robert and I always believed in using our blessings to help others. He'd be proud to see the house used this way. We're thinking of calling it the Kinsley Home, Pastor Jim said. A place for families to rebuild their lives, just as you and Robert built yours here. That would be lovely, Martha's eyes misted over. I do have one condition, though. I'd like to continue tending the garden, if that's all right. Robert put so much love into it. Of course, Alice exclaimed. In fact, we were hoping you might teach some of the residents about gardening. Many of them have never had a yard before. As they worked through the details, Martha felt a growing sense of peace. This was right. This was what Robert would have wanted. The house that had sheltered their family would now shelter others in need. When the doorbell rang that evening, Martha was surprised to find Caroline on her doorstep, Lily beside her. The little girl lunged forward to hug her grandmother's legs. Grandma, Mommy said we could visit you. Martha bent down to embrace her granddaughter, breathing in the sweet scent of her shampoo. What a wonderful surprise. Come in, both of you. Lily chattered excitedly as they entered the house, telling Martha about her dance recital and the new puppy her friend Emma had gotten. Caroline hung back, looking uncomfortable. Would you like some tea? Martha offered. And I think I have some cookies Lily might enjoy. Cookies! Lily cheered. While Lily devoured chocolate chip cookies at the kitchen table, Caroline drew Martha aside. Thomas told me what happened, she said in a low voice. About the house. Is it true? Martha nodded. Yes, I'm donating it to the church's family ministry program. Caroline closed her eyes briefly. I had no idea, Martha, about any of it. The rent, the deed. Thomas told me everything was settled, that you had agreed to all of it. And you believed him. He's my husband. Caroline's voice cracked slightly. But I should have asked more questions. I'm so sorry. Martha squeezed her daughter-in-law's hand. We all make mistakes, Caroline. What matters is what we do next. Caroline glanced over at Lily, who was happily drawing with crayons Martha kept in a kitchen drawer for her visits. Thomas is not handling this well. He's talking about contesting the donation, claiming you're not competent. Martha felt a flash of anger, quickly suppressed. That won't work. My doctor just gave me a clean bill of health last month, including a cognitive assessment. Pastor Jim made sure of that before accepting the donation. I didn't think it would work either, Caroline admitted. But I wanted you to know what he's planning. Thank you for telling me. Martha hesitated, then added. And thank you for bringing Lily. It means a lot to see her. Caroline's eyes filled with tears. I should have brought her more often. That's on me, not Thomas. I got caught up in our busy lives, and I made excuses. Well, you're here now, and I hope you'll both visit me at Orchard Grove. The apartment isn't as big as this house, but there's plenty of room for family. We will, Caroline promised. And maybe Thomas will come around eventually. Martha smiled sadly. I hope so. He's still my son, and I love him. That hasn't changed. After Caroline and Lily left, Martha sat in her favorite armchair by the living room window. The summer evening stretched long and golden, casting warm light across the hardwood floors Robert had installed. So many memories in these walls, so much love and life and loss. But the past was the past. Martha looked toward the future, her new apartment, her quilting classes, the families who would find sanctuary in this house just as she once had. It wasn't the path she'd expected to take in her golden years, but it felt right. It felt like something Robert would understand. As dusk fell, Martha rose and walked through each room of the house, saying a silent goodbye. Not to the building itself, but to the life she'd lived here. It had been a good life, despite its hardships. And the next chapter, she decided, would be good too. Different, but good. The Friday church council meeting was scheduled for 2 o'clock. Martha dressed carefully in a navy blue dress, and her good pearls, the ones Robert had given her for their 25th anniversary. She packed a small tote bag with the house's original deed, her identification, and the donation paperwork Pastor Jim had provided. Just as she was about to leave, the phone rang. It was Thomas. Mom, don't do this. His voice was raw with emotion. Please, we can work something out. Martha closed her eyes, her hand tight on the receiver. It's already done, Thomas. The council is meeting today to finalize everything. I'll double whatever the church is offering you. They're not offering me anything, Thomas. It's a donation. A long pause. Why are you doing this to me? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with accusation. Martha thought carefully before answering. I'm not doing anything to you, Thomas. I'm doing something for others, something that honors your father's memory and the values we tried to teach you. By taking away my inheritance, by giving strangers the house I grew up in. This house was never meant to be an investment property, Thomas. It was a home, our home, and now it will be a home for people who truly need one. She heard him take a shuddering breath. What if I apologize? What if I admit I was wrong about the rent? Would you reconsider then? Oh, Thomas. Martha's heart ached for the man who still couldn't see beyond his own interests. This isn't about the rent anymore. This is about who we choose to be in this world. The kind of legacy we leave behind. Fine, he said, his voice hardening. Do what you want, but don't expect me to ever forgive you for this. The line went dead. Martha stood holding the silent receiver, tears slipping down her cheeks. This was the price of her choice, perhaps losing her son forever. Was it worth it? She thought of the families who would find shelter here, the children who would play in Robert's garden, the single mothers who would rebuild their lives within these walls. Yes, it was worth it, even if the cost was high. Martha wiped her eyes, straightened her shoulders, and picked up her tote bag. It was time to keep her appointment with the church council. Time to turn the page to a new chapter for herself, and for the house that had sheltered so much love. The church council meeting took place in the small conference room adjacent to Pastor Jim's office. 8 council members sat around an oak table that had served the church for over 50 years. Martha recognized most of them longtime members who had watched Thomas grow up, who had brought casseroles when Robert died, who had been her extended family through all of life's seasons. Alice Pemberton, elegant as always in a floral blouse and navy slacks, greeted Martha with a warm hug. We're so grateful you're here, Martha. What you're doing will change lives for generations to come. Pastor Jim guided Martha to a seat at the head of the table. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge what a meaningful moment this is for our congregation. The Kinsley family has been part of First Community Church for over 40 years. Robert served as a deacon. Martha has made quilts for every baby born in this church for the past 20 years. And now, this extraordinary act of generosity continues that legacy of service. Martha felt a lump in her throat as the council members nodded in agreement. These people knew her really, knew Heron a way her own son seemed to have forgotten. The meeting proceeded smoothly. The church's attorney, a gentleman named Walter Green, who had also been Robert's friend, reviewed the donation paperwork. "Everything is in order," he confirmed. "Mrs. Kinsley has clear title to the property, and all the proper documentation has been prepared for the transfer." "The renovation committee has already met," Alice added. "We'll need to make some modifications to meet code requirements for the transitional housing program, but the basic structure is sound. It's a testament to how well the Kinsleys maintained their home." Pastor Jim turned to Martha. "We'd like to have a small dedication ceremony when the renovations are complete. Would that be all right with you?" Martha nodded. "I'd like that, and I'm still hoping to help with the garden." "Of course," Pastor Jim assured her. "In fact, we were thinking the garden could be a project for the residents, a way to put down roots, both literally and figuratively." As the meeting continued, Martha found herself unexpectedly emotional. This house, the one she and Robert had scraped and saved to buy, the one where they'd raised their son, the one she'd fought to keep after Robert's death, would now shelter other families fighting their own battles. There was a poetic rightness to it that filled her with peace. After the final signatures were completed and congratulations exchanged, Martha stepped outside into the warm June afternoon. The church's stained glass windows cast jewel-toned reflections on the sidewalk. She stood for a moment, breathing deeply, feeling as though a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. "Mrs. Kinsley?" Martha turned to see a young woman approaching, a toddler balanced on her hip. The woman looked vaguely familiar. "I'm Jenny Ramirez," she said. "You probably don't remember me, but I was in your Sunday school class years ago. My mom used to clean houses for some of the church families." "Of course, Jenny Martinez." Martha smiled in recognition. "You've grown up. And who's this handsome young man?" "This is Miguel, my son." Jenny shifted the boy to her other hip. "He's 2. Pastor Jim mentioned you were here today, and I wanted to say hello. And thank you." "Thank me? For what, dear?" Jenny's eyes grew bright with unshed tears. "For the house. I heard what you're doing. Pastor Jim told me your house will be the first in the transitional housing program." Martha tilted her head. "Are you involved with the program?" Jenny nodded. "Miguel and I have been staying at the women's shelter for the past 3 months, my husband." She trailed off, glancing at her son. "Let's just say we needed to leave in a hurry. I've been on the waiting list for affordable housing, but everything's so expensive these days. Pastor Jim said we might be the first family to move into your house once the renovations are done." Martha felt her own eyes filling with tears. "Oh, Jenny, I had no idea." "It's okay. We're managing. I'm working at the hospital no reception desk, not nursing like I planned, but it's a start. Miguel goes to the church daycare program while I work." She bounced the little boy who giggled and grabbed at her earring. "Anyway, I just wanted you to know what this means to us. To have a real home again, with a yard for Miguel to play in, it's more than I dared hope for." Martha reached out and squeezed the young woman's free hand. "The house has a very special garden. I think Miguel will love it." "Thank you," Jenny whispered, "for everything." As Jenny and her son walked away, Martha stood motionless, her heart full. This was why. This was exactly why giving up the house felt right, despite Thomas's anger. The home that had sheltered her family would now shelter Jenny and little Miguel, giving them a safe place to heal and grow. It was worth it, even if Thomas never understood. The following week passed in a flurry of activity. Martha began packing in earnest, sorting through 40 years of accumulated belongings. Alice and several other church friends came to help, exclaiming over treasured mementos and reminiscing about shared memories. "What about the furniture?" Alice asked as they wrapped china in newspaper. "Will you take it all to Orchard Grove?" Martha shook her head. "Just my bedroom set, my sewing table, and a few special pieces. The apartment is furnished, and there's not room for much more. I thought I'd let the church use whatever might be helpful for the house and donate the rest." "That's very generous," Alice said. "But are you sure? Some of these pieces must have sentimental value." Martha ran her hand over the dining room table where her family had shared thousands of meals. "They're just things, Alice. The memories don't live in the furniture. They live in here." She touched her heart. "And I'm taking those with me." On Wednesday afternoon, Martha was sorting through the hall closet when the doorbell rang. She opened the door to find Caroline standing on the porch, looking nervous. "I hope I'm not interrupting," she said. "I brought some empty boxes from my office. I thought they might help with your packing." "That's very thoughtful. Come in." Martha stepped aside to let her daughter-in-law enter. "I've just made some iced tea, if you'd like some." They sat at the kitchen table, the boxes stacked by the door. Caroline fidgeted with her glass, clearly working up to something. "Thomas doesn't know I'm here," she finally said. "He's still processing everything." "I understand," Martha replied, though her heart ached at the confirmation that her son was still angry. "The thing is," Caroline continued, "I've been doing a lot of thinking since our lunch, about family and values and the example we're setting for Lily." Martha waited, sensing there was more. "When Thomas and I got married, we talked about wanting a simple life, a meaningful life. But somewhere along the way, it became all about the bigger house, the fancier car, the right preschool." Caroline stared into her tea. "I barely recognize us sometimes." "It's easy to get caught up," Martha said gently. "Robert and I had those moments too." Caroline looked up. "How did you stay grounded? How did you keep your priorities straight?" Martha considered the question. "We reminded each other of what mattered, and we tried to live by the values we claim to hold. Not perfectly, no one does that, but consistently." She smiled sadly. "I thought we taught Thomas those same values. Maybe we didn't do as good a job as I believed." "It's not your fault," Caroline said quickly. "Thomas makes his own choices. We all do." She took a deep breath. "Which is why I wanted to tell you that I support what you're doing with the house. It's your home, and using it to help families in need is a beautiful thing." Martha reached across the table and squeezed Caroline's hand. "Thank you. That means a great deal to me. And I want Lily to know her grandmother, to really know you, not just see you on holidays. I've already talked to Mrs. Abernathy at Orchard Grove about setting up regular visits. There's a children's reading program there that Lily could join, and we could have dinner with you once a week." Tears pricked at Martha's eyes. "I'd love that more than I can say." Caroline smiled, looking relieved. "And maybe, with time, Thomas will come around too. He's stubborn, but he does love you." "I know he does," Martha said. "In his way." After Caroline left, Martha returned to her sorting with a lighter heart. She might be losing her house and, temporarily at least, her relationship with her son. But she was gaining something: a renewed connection with her granddaughter, and the knowledge that her home would continue to shelter families in need. The rest of the week flew by. On Saturday morning, Martha was in the garden, digging up some of Robert's prized rose bushes to take to her new apartment, when a familiar car pulled into the driveway. Thomas stepped out, looking uncharacteristically casual in jeans and a polo shirt. Martha straightened slowly, her knees protesting after an hour of gardening. She brushed dirt from her hands as Thomas approached. "Mom," he said, his voice neutral, "Caroline said you might need help with some heavy lifting." Martha studied her son's face. His expression was guarded, but he was here. That was something. That's thoughtful of you. I do have a few boxes I can't manage on my own. They worked in silence for a while, Thomas carrying boxes to Martha's car or to the pile designated for donation. The tension between them was palpable but not hostile. More like the careful distance of two people trying to find their way back to each other. Finally, as they took a break in the kitchen, Thomas spoke. I talked to Pastor Jim yesterday. Martha poured them each a glass of water. Oh? He told me about the family who'll be moving in first, the young woman and her little boy. Thomas stared at his glass. He said they left an abusive situation. That they've been living in a shelter. Yes, Jenny and Miguel. I met them briefly after the council meeting. Thomas nodded slowly. Pastor Jim said there are 3 more families on the waiting list, single parents mostly, trying to get back on their feet. That's my understanding. Thomas looked up, meeting her eyes directly for the first time. Did you know that when you decided to donate the house, about these specific families? Martha shook her head. No, I knew the church needed space for their transitional housing program, but I didn't know who would benefit. But you must have had some idea. I knew the house would help people who needed it. That was enough. Martha set down her glass. Thomas, why are you here? Really? He sighed heavily. I don't know. To understand, maybe. To try to make sense of why you would give away a house worth over $300,000. Is that what this is about, the money? Partly, he admitted. I won't lie about that, but it's also about family legacy. This house, everything you and Dad built, I always thought it would stay in the family, that Lily would bring her children here someday. Martha considered her words carefully. Legacy isn't just about property or money, Thomas. It's about values, the things we stand for, the difference we make in the world. She gestured around the kitchen. Your father and I built this house with love and sacrifice. Passing it on to another family who needs that same fresh start that honors our legacy far more than selling it or renting it out ever could. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. I still don't understand how you could just let it go. This is your home. It was my home, Martha corrected gently. But at 68, I don't need 4 bedrooms and a big yard anymore. What I need is community, purpose, and a place that's easy for me to manage as I get older. You could have had that here, with us helping you. For $2,000 a month? Martha couldn't keep the edge from her voice. Thomas had the grace to look ashamed. That was a mistake. I got caught up in the numbers, the potential rental income. I wasn't thinking about what it meant to you. No, Martha agreed. You weren't. They fell into silence again. Martha could see her son struggling, his pride warring with the recognition that he'd made a serious error in judgment. Finally, Thomas spoke again. Pastor Jim mentioned something else, about you continuing to work with the garden at the house even after you move. Yes, it's important to me, and I think it will be good for the families who stay there to have that connection to growing things. Thomas nodded slowly. He asked if I might help too, with some of the maintenance the house will need. Gutters, minor repairs, that sort of thing. Martha raised her eyebrows in surprise. What did you say? I said I'd think about it. Thomas ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of Robert that Martha's heart clenched. It feels weird, the idea of working on the house when it's not ours anymore. But then I started thinking about that little boy, Miguel, and how he deserves a safe place with working gutters and no leaky faucets. Yes, Martha said softly. He does. Thomas stood and walked to the window, looking out at the garden where he'd played as a child. I'm still upset about how all this happened, Mom. I still think there could have been another way. Perhaps, Martha acknowledged, but this is the path I've chosen. I know, and I'm trying to accept that. He turned back to face her. Caroline says I should look at this as an opportunity, not a loss, a chance to teach Lily about giving back. Martha smiled. Your wife is a wise woman. Smarter than me, that's for sure. A ghost of a smile touched Thomas's lips. She's pretty angry at me right now. Says I need to make this right with you before it's too late. And what do you think? Thomas sighed deeply. I think I need more time, but I don't want to lose my mother over this, despite everything. It wasn't an apology, not really, but it was a beginning. Martha stood and crossed to her son, placing a hand on his arm. You haven't lost me, Thomas. You never will. He nodded, not quite meeting her eyes. So when do you move to the apartment? Next Saturday. The church is sending some volunteers to help with the heavy furniture. I could come, Thomas offered. Me and some guys from the office. We'd have you settled in no time. Martha felt a tightness in her chest ease slightly. I'd like that very much. After Thomas left, Martha sat in Robert's old armchair, thinking about the conversation. Things weren't fully healed between them perhaps. They never would be completely. But a door had been opened, a possibility of reconciliation that hadn't existed before. She thought about Jenny and Miguel, who would soon be sleeping under this roof, safe from whoever had hurt them. She thought about her new apartment at Orchard Grove, with its sunny windows and community of peers. She thought about Caroline's promise to bring Lily for regular visits and Thomas's tentative offer to help maintain the house for its new residents. None of it was what she had expected for this chapter of her life, but perhaps it was what was meant to be. The week before Martha's move was filled with activity. Friends from church came to help pack the last of her belongings. The donation center sent a truck for the furniture she wouldn't be taking. Pastor Jim and the renovation committee stopped by to take measurements and make plans for the modifications the house would need. On Wednesday, Caroline brought Lily after school to say goodbye to Grandma's house. But why can't you stay here, Grandma? Lily asked, her 6-year-old brow furrowed in confusion. Don't you like your house anymore? Martha sat with her granddaughter on the window seat in what had once been Thomas's bedroom. I love this house very much, but it's big for just one person. And there are families who need a nice house like this. Families who don't have a safe place to live right now. Lily considered this. Like when Maddie's apartment got flooded and she had to stay with her grandma. Something like that, yes. Except these families don't have grandmas with extra rooms, so the church is going to let them stay here until they can find homes of their own. That's nice of you, Grandma. Lily leaned against Martha's side. Will I still get to see you at your new house? Absolutely. Your mom is going to bring you to visit me often. And there's a duck pond at my new place. We can feed the ducks together. Lily's face lit up. I love ducks. Can we go see your new house now? Caroline, who had been listening from the doorway, stepped into the room. Not today, sweetie, but soon. Maybe this weekend after Grandma gets settled in. And guess what else? Martha added. There's a craft room at Orchard Grove where I'll be teaching quilting classes. Maybe you could join us sometimes. Can I make a quilt for my dolls? Lily asked excitedly. Of course you can. I'll help you pick out special fabric just for them. As Lily chattered about her dolls and their quilt needs, Martha caught Caroline's eye over the child's head. Her daughter-in-law smiled warmly, a silent affirmation of her promise to keep Martha connected to her granddaughter's life. Later that evening, as Martha was making a final check of the kitchen cabinets, her phone rang. It was Alice Pemberton. Martha, I hope I'm not calling too late. I just got the most wonderful news and couldn't wait to share it. Not too late at all. What's happened? You remember Jenny Ramirez, the young woman who will be moving into your house first? Of course. Well, she just got accepted into the nursing program at the community college. She'll be starting classes in the fall while Miguel attends the church preschool program. Martha sank into a kitchen chair, a smile spreading across her face. That's wonderful news. She mentioned she'd wanted to be a nurse. Yes, it's been her dream since high school apparently. But then she married young, had Miguel, and the situation with her husband. Alice hesitated. Well, let's just say educational opportunities weren't a priority in that household. How will she manage school and working and raising Miguel? That's the other bit of news. The church council met tonight and approved a special scholarship for her from the education fund. She'll still work part-time at the hospital, but she won't have to worry about tuition. Martha felt tears welling in her eyes. Alice, that's perfect. Just perfect. We thought you'd want to know. This is exactly what the transitional housing program is meant to do, give people not just shelter, but a chance to build a better future. Alice's voice grew soft. Your gift is already changing lives, Martha, and this is just the beginning. After they hung up, Martha sat in the quiet kitchen for a long time. The house seemed to embrace her, 40 years of memories whispering from every corner. She could almost feel Robert's presence, his approval of what she'd done. Moving day dawned clear and warm. Martha woke early, taking one last walk through the garden, while dew still sparkled on the grass. She clipped a few roses for a bouquet to take to her new home, breathing in their sweet fragrance. At 9 o'clock, a small fleet of vehicles arrived. Thomas and 3 of his co-workers, 2 pickup trucks from church members, and a van from Orchard Grove. Martha stood on the porch, watching as her son organized the moving crew with efficiency, directing which furniture would go where. Mom, where do you want the sewing table? Thomas called from the living room. In the bedroom or the main living area of the apartment? The living area, please. Near the window for the light. Thomas nodded, relaying the instruction to his friends. He'd been polite but distant all morning, still processing his feelings about the donation, but he was here, helping, and that meant something. By noon, the last of Martha's belongings had been loaded into the various vehicles. She stood in the empty living room, saying a silent goodbye to the house that had been her home for so long. Ready, Mom? Thomas appeared in the doorway, car keys in hand. Martha nodded, taking one last look around. Yes, I'm ready. As they walked to the car, Martha paused on the front walk, turning to look back at the house. The morning glories she'd planted years ago still climbed the porch trellis, their blue flowers open to the summer sun. You okay? Thomas asked, a note of concern in his voice. I'm fine, Martha assured him, just remembering. Thomas followed her gaze to the house. I have a lot of good memories here too, he said quietly, playing catch with Dad in the backyard, building that ridiculous treehouse that nearly collapsed. Martha smiled. Your father was many things, but a carpenter wasn't one of them. No, Thomas agreed with a small laugh. Definitely not. They stood together for a moment, sharing the memory of Robert Kinsley's, determined if misguided attempts at home improvement, his love for his family, his generous heart. He would have approved, Thomas said suddenly. What you're doing with the house, Dad would have thought it was exactly right. Martha felt tears spring to her eyes. Thank you for saying that. It means a lot. Thomas shrugged, uncomfortable with the emotion of the moment. It's just the truth. Dad always said our job was to leave the world better than we found it. He hesitated, then added, I haven't done a very good job of that lately. There's always time to start, Martha said gently. Thomas nodded, then opened the car door for her. Let's get you settled in your new place. The apartment at Orchard Grove was everything Martha had hoped for. Bright, modern, and just the right size for one person. As the moving crew arranged her furniture and unpacked boxes, she stood by the large living room window, taking in the view of the garden courtyard below. Mrs. Kinsley, welcome to Orchard Grove. Mrs. Abernathy bustled in, carrying a potted plant. A little housewarming gift from all of us on the staff. It's lovely, thank you. Martha accepted the cheerful yellow chrysanthemum. Once you're settled, I'll introduce you to some of your neighbors. We have a social hour every Wednesday afternoon in the community room, and there's chair yoga on Monday mornings if you're interested. The quilting room you mentioned, when might I be able to set up my supplies there? Anytime you like. It's open to residents 7 days a week, and we've already had several people express interest in your classes. Mrs. Abernathy lowered her voice confidentially. Between you and me, we've been needing someone with real skills to take over that program. The last instructor thought quilting meant cutting up old blankets and tying them with yarn. Martha laughed. Well, we'll have to remedy that. I've been teaching proper quilting techniques for over 20 years. As Mrs. Abernathy continued her orientation, pointing out features of the apartment and explaining the meal schedule in the dining room, Martha felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This was where she was meant to be, now a place where her skills were valued, where she had community, where she could age with dignity and purpose. By late afternoon, the last box had been unpacked, the moving crew had departed, and Martha was alone in her new home. She'd arranged her favorite armchair by the window, positioned her sewing table where the light would be best, and placed Robert's photograph on the bedside table. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Thomas standing there, looking uncertain. I forgot to bring this in earlier, he said, holding out a small box. It was in the trunk of my car. Thank you. Would you like to come in for a cup of tea? Thomas hesitated, then nodded. Sure, for a few minutes. Martha busied herself with the electric kettle she'd set up in the kitchenette while Thomas wandered around the apartment, examining the layout. It's nice, he said finally. Seems well maintained. It is, and the staff is wonderful, very attentive, without being intrusive. They sat at the small dining table, tea steaming in mugs Martha had used for decades. I've been thinking, Thomas began, staring into his tea, about what you said, about legacy being more than just property or money. Martha waited, giving him space to collect his thoughts. I didn't handle any of this well, he continued. The house, the fee I tried to charge you. He winced at the memory. It wasn't how Dad would have handled it. It wasn't how you raised me to behave. We all make mistakes, Thomas. This was more than a mistake, it was. He struggled for the words. It was forgetting what matters, who matters. He finally looked up, meeting her eyes. I'm sorry, Mom. Truly sorry. The simple apology, offered without excuses or qualifications, touched Martha deeply. Thank you. That means a lot to me. Thomas nodded, then reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. I want to make this right, not just with words. Martha took the envelope and opened it. Inside was a check made out to First Community Church for $5,000. It's for the transitional housing program. Thomas explained. For supplies, or whatever they need for the house. I talked to Pastor Jim about it. He said they could use it for the renovation work before the families move in. Martha stared at the check, then at her son. Thomas, this is very generous. He shrugged, looking embarrassed. It's a start, and I told Pastor Jim I'd help with maintenance on the house, not just occasionally, but regularly. Caroline and I discussed it, and we're going to make it a family project. Something Lily can be part of too when she's a little older. Martha felt tears threatening again. She reached across the table and took her son's hand. Your father would be so proud of you right now. Thomas squeezed her hand, his own eyes suspiciously bright. I'm trying to remember what you and Dad taught me, about giving back, about family. Well, you've made a good start today. They finished their tea, the atmosphere between them lighter than it had been in months. As Thomas prepared to leave, he paused at the door. Caroline and I were thinking you might like to come for dinner on Sunday. Nothing fancy, just family time. And maybe you could stay for the afternoon? Lily's been asking when she can show you her new dance routine. I love that, Martha said warmly. Great! I'll pick you up around 11. Maybe we could stop by the house on the way. I want to show you the garden improvements I've been thinking about. Some raised beds might be easier for the families to maintain, and for you to work with too, with your arthritis. That sounds perfect. After Thomas left, Martha unpacked the small box he'd brought up. Inside was a framed family photo from Christmas 10 years earlier. Robert, Martha, Thomas, Caroline, and baby Lily, all smiling in front of the Christmas tree in the living room of the house. A slice of their shared history, preserved for the future. Martha placed the photo on a shelf in her new living room, next to the potted chrysanthemum from Mrs. Abernathy. Old memories and new beginnings side by side. As evening fell, she sat in her armchair by the window, watching the sunset paint the courtyard garden in golden light. From somewhere down the hall, she could hear the faint sound of a television, and voices chatting in the corridor, her new neighbors, her new community. It wasn't the future she had planned. When Robert died, when she signed over what she thought was just power of attorney to Thomas, when she received that first accommodation fee bill, none of that had been in her vision for her golden years. But life rarely followed the expected path. The important thing was how you navigated the unexpected turns, the values you held to when the road got rough. Martha thought about Jenny and Miguel, who would soon be living in her old house, starting their new journey. She thought about the quilting classes she would teach, passing on skills she'd refined over decades. She thought about Sunday dinner with Thomas, Caroline, and Lily, the family bonds being rewoven, stronger for having been tested. Her son had tried to charge her rent for the house she'd raised him in. And in responding to that painful moment, she'd found a new purpose, a new home, and perhaps even a stronger relationship with her family than she'd had before. Not bad for 68, Martha thought with a smile. Not bad at all. The ringing of the telephone interrupted her reflections. It was Alice Pemberton. Martha, I hope I'm not calling too late. How was the move? Are you all settled in? Everything went smoothly. I'm sitting in my new living room right now, watching the sunset. Wonderful. Listen, the reason I'm calling the church council met again this afternoon, after you left. We've been discussing the dedication ceremony for the house, and we have a proposal for you. Oh? We'd like to officially name it the Robert and Martha Kinsley Home for Families. Would that be all right with you? Martha felt her heart swell with emotion. That would be more than all right, Alice. That would be an honor. Excellent. We'll plan the dedication for next month once the renovations are complete. Oh, and Jenny Ramirez stopped by the church office today. She wanted me to tell you that she and Miguel can't wait to meet you properly and thank you in person. After they hung up, Martha sat in the gathering darkness, feeling a deep sense of peace. Her house, the Robert and Martha Kinsley Home for Families, would continue to be a place of love and growth and new beginnings. Just as it had always been. She would continue to tend the garden there, watching Miguel and other children play where Thomas had once played. She would teach quilting to her new neighbors, creating beauty with skilled hands despite the arthritis that had once made her fear dependence. She would have Sunday dinners with her family, rebuilding the bonds that had been strained but never broken. And when Thomas had asked her about legacy earlier, she hadn't told him the whole truth. Yes, legacy was about values, about making a difference in the world. But it was also about continuity, the thread that connected past, present, and future, the love that endured beyond buildings and belongings. That was the true legacy she and Robert had created. Not a house, but a home. Not an inheritance, but an example. Not perfection, but forgiveness and growth and second chances. Martha smiled into the twilight, grateful for this unexpected new chapter. for the wisdom to recognize when to let go, and the courage to open her hands and release what had been in order to embrace what could be. It was, she decided, a very good beginning.